Good morning, everyone who joined us for this webinar this morning. This is our program of webinars, which ARC Midlands has been doing for the last few months. In the past, we focus on things like quality data monitoring in research, social model of disability, and also the big topic of importance of quality impact assessment in research. Today's session will focus on neurodiversity in research, and we want to spend an hour with you to recognize how important neurodiversity is in context of research, both in terms of accessibility and the consideration we need to undertake while conducting the research. My name is Barbara Czesnikowska. I'm a Community Engagement and Inclusion Manager for the Centre for Ethnic and Research.
I'm just thinking we might just do a band thing.
And I'm joined today by fantastic speakers. We will introduce them shortly. So before we move into the presentation section, a few key housekeeping. As you probably noticed already, we will be recording the presentation section of the webinar. When we move into the question and answer session, that would not be recorded, so it allows people for free conversation. During the presentation, please do keep your camera off and mute yourself. It just allows for very smooth running of the webinar. And we will start the conversation. So next slide, please, Michelle. So as I said, we joined today by a fantastic lineup of speakers. Our Julian Harrison, Equality and Diversity Consultant working with the Centre in ARC Midlands, Sarah Cooper, Research Assistant, Charlotte Hall, who is Principal Research Fellow, and Jess Williams, Postdoctoral Research Associate from University of Leicester. Next slide, please. So what we're planning to do today, we've done the welcoming introduction, then we will going to have a presentation from Julian, who's going to explore what is neurodiversity, particularly within the context of autism. He will have a really in-depth conversation with you from his own personal experience. We will also highlight some of the accessibility measure, particularly around reasonable adjustment in context of research, and also how we can mitigate that in your practice. Followed by two fantastic presentations around lived experience and example of project. And before we end up the session, it will be opportunity for you to ask the question and maybe share some reflection. Next slide, please. And obviously, as part of our social media engagement, we want you to use your social media platform and use the hashtag Equality in Research Matters. So that's the hashtag for today, and please do share your reflection, pointers and learning throughout the session and afterwards. Next slide, please. So I think that's the slide where Julian Harrison, my colleague, is going to jump in and take over. Over to you, Jules.
Thank you, Barbara. Good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Julian Harrison. As Barbara says, I'm an Equality and Diversity Consultant working with the Centre for Ethnic Health Research. But as important, if not probably more important today, I am neurodivergent myself. I have autism, so I'll be speaking from both a lived experience and an equality perspective. As Barbara says, we're going to focus primarily on autism, but it's worth just having a slide to focus on what actually we mean by neurodiversity. And neurodiversity refers to the natural diversity variability in human neurology. Neurology referring to both brain and body. We're all unique, basically, is what we're trying to say here. Neurotypical describes most of the population, the majority group that expresses themselves in ways that are seen, and this is a bit of a problematic term, as the societal norm. But please treat use of the word norm advisedly. For neurodivergent people such as myself, the way our brains work is entirely normal to us. Neurodivergence is the term for when someone's neurological processes make people learn and or behave significantly differently from neurotypical people. And around 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent in some way. That's a lot of people, though with an increase in awareness and late diagnosis as well, this is likely to be higher. You may also come across the phrase neurodevelopmental disorders, sorry. And these, as experienced, can be and often are seen as disabilities, depending on how they present. Neuro-inclusive is an important term. It's about the approach, the actions, behavior, and attitudes that include neurodivergent people. So that is what we're trying to promote and encourage you to be today, to be neuro-inclusive. Next slide, please, Michelle. I'm not going to go through all of these in turn. There are so many examples of neurodiversity. Some of these I'm sure on the screen you will have heard of. There is autism, autism spectrum disorder. There is ADHD, for example. A lot of these you will not be familiar about. And it's important that if when we're looking at neurodiversity, we look at the full range of what comprises neurodiverse conditions. Next slide, please. Autistic people are likely to have any of a large number of what we call co-occurring conditions. Although officially research states that most autistic people have one co-occurring condition, anecdotally it's a greater number. I personally have 6 of the things that you can see on the screen in front of you. Sometimes these conditions are also inherently part of a neurodiverse condition as opposed to an additional common co-occurring component. Anxiety, for example, often accompanies people who are autistic. And some neurodivergent people also like to view co-occurring conditions as overlapping strengths, which is an important insight. And I'm going to show you a quote in a couple of slides' time, which very much refers to that. Next slide, please. So, what is autism? A massive subject. The word autism itself originates from the Greek word autos, which means self. And autism is a developmental condition that affects how individuals interact with the world, how they communicate, and how they process information. And there's no negativity or positivity in this, there's just difference. 1 in 100 people are autistic. And 1 out of 10 of those with autism and 1 out of 880 of the total population will be in the severe range. So autism is inherently individualistic. It can affect people in many different ways. Being autistic does not mean you have an illness or a disease. It just means your brain works in a different way from other people. And that can mean that you need specific help and support. Some aspects of autism can, of course, be inherently disabling. The NHS recognises that conditions like autism can present significant challenges and qualify, therefore, as disabilities. Now, you could do a whole day course on the issue of autistic masking. It is such a big issue within and for autistic people. And what it is, it's a form of safety mechanism made up of different layers of physical and social complex actions, which an autistic person uses both consciously and unconsciously, to fit in and to self-protect in an endless variety of differing situations and environments. Ostensibly, it's about acting and hiding the reality of how the world is actually perceived by learning and then rehearsing what is considered by others to be normal. It is exhausting and can be very debilitating. Just how this might manifest itself. It might manifest itself in things like physical behaviors, like people standing in a certain way, walking a certain way, talking a certain way, but also things like masking pain, telling someone something doesn't hurt when it does, either emotionally or physically, forcing physical or mental exertion to make oneself appear normal. And if you build it up over so many years, some of the times autistic masking becomes inherently automatic. I know that's certainly the case with me. Some people are very, very good at masking or hiding their autistic traits, but that doesn't mean they don't need as much support, accommodations, and reasonable adjustments. They do. So giving this particular seminar this morning, I'm autistically masking. I know I am, because this is not the thing I would choose to do in my reality of living with autism. It's something I've become accustomed to doing and therefore am able to do. But it doesn't mean I don't need support. And it probably means that this afternoon I'm going to crash majorly. Next slide, please. Autism is something you're born with and is with you the entirety of your life. Signs of autism might be noticed when you're very young or not until you're much older. Autism has a strong genetic component and runs in families. In fact, many parents find out they are autistic after their child has been assessed. That was very much the case of me and my youngest child, Ellery. They were diagnosed autistic only 3 or 4 years ago. That culminated in me recognizing what probably I already knew. Yes, I'm autistic as well. Autism can't be cured. And that's a problematic term in many cases. Symptoms and behavior can, though, be supported with appropriate interventions. And support can involve help in forming relationships and making personal arrangements. There's a lot of myths as well about autism. Autism is not caused by bad parenting. It's also not caused by vaccines such as the MMR vaccine. It's not linked to diet, and it's not an infection that you can spread to other people. Some autistic people have average or above average intelligence. Some people massively above intelligence, as you'll see on the next slide. Some autistic people also have a learning disability. This means they may find it hard to look after themselves and need help with daily life. So, as I say, come back to that issue of it being individualistic. It very much depends on how an individual presents. Next slide, please. So I'll put a slide here of sort of famous autistic people. Now, I'll probably, some of these faces may not be familiar to you, so I'll go through each one in turn. But all these people are or have been autistic. So if we're going left to right from the top, people will probably recognize Steven Spielberg. You probably won't recognize the guy next to him. This is Satoshi Tajiri. He's the creator of Pokemon. Greta Thunberg, people will know probably from environmental activities. The person next to Greta is a personal idol and hero of mine. This is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who obviously was not diagnosed with autism, but his behavior and his thought processes, as indicated in letters and so forth, indicate yes, he probably was autistic. Next to Mozart, we have Lucy Bronze, who is the England international footballer, who even this week has talked about in the press about her relationship with autism, which is very interesting. I recommend you have a look at it. Left to right at the bottom, that's Michelangelo. There, next to Michelangelo is a guy who's done a lot of work with regard to awareness, autism awareness raising. This is Chris Packham. Next to Chris is, who is this? This is Tylen Grant, and Tylen Grant is a star of Hollyoaks. And the last person, if you know The Chase on ITV, you'll know this is Anne Hegarty, the governess. There's a whole list of other people. Albert Einstein was autistic. Bob Dylan was autistic. Then you have Anthony Hopkins, Jerry Seinfeld, Susan Boyle. I could go on and on. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about accessibility measures or reasonable adjustments for people who are autistic, we need to probably assess what we mean by an accessibility measure or a reasonable adjustment. And we used both terms during the course of this presentation. So what is it? It's a change that must be made to remove or reduce any disadvantage associated with a person's disability. But reasonable adjustments can also relate to any of the other 9 protected characteristics of the Equality Act as well. And this applies to research as well as service delivery and employment arrangements. Organisations, particularly in the public sector, have a legal duty to ask for and arrange reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act. And adjustments are not just about the provision of specialist equipment, they can be about working arrangements, how to engage, research arrangements, and so on. They are also about the way things are presented. This is important in relation to autism. Next slide, please. So how do I identify an accessibility measure? Well, probably by asking this fundamental question again and again. If I do something this way, who may be disadvantaged or excluded? And knowing that, what can I do to mitigate that disadvantage and exclusion? Possibly you could conduct an equality impact assessment. Doesn't need to be large. It does need, though, to be relevant and precise. Do some desktop research. There were some really good websites developed by and for autistic people. Examples include National Autistic Society, Autistica, and a particular favourite of mine, the Autistic Advocate, Kieran Rose. He's an important guy to listen to, I would suggest. And perhaps most important of all, ask autistic people themselves. Though don't assume that what applies to one person applies to all autistic people. Next slide, please. I've got a quote here from a guy called Josh. Josh is a trans male autistic adult, and I really like this quote. It says, "Autism can be my superpower and also my greatest weakness. I see the world in a way that seems so different to most others. I notice the finest and most obscure details, but very often misunderstand or I'm totally unaware of the bigger picture. Very often being autistic makes me feel like an alien living on the wrong planet. I've often referred to it as a cat amidst a sea of dogs. It's that different." Next slide, please. So just some common autistic traits and behaviors. Difficulties with social communication and social interaction challenges. That's important. Difficulties understanding and interpreting how others think and feel. Many autistic people have a direct communication style. They interpret things very literally and can be quite blunt in responses. So metaphors, sarcastic comments may not be understood or picked up. Many also don't read the signs displayed by other people as to when to talk, etc. This can mean people being interrupted and feeling an intense need to make yourself heard. Eye contact may also be an issue. Social activities and arrangements may therefore be difficult to navigate. This includes networking activities, breakout rooms, and breaks in general. Some autistic people have a restricted diet and may not wish to eat with others. Repetitive and restrictive behavior. Autistic people may try to copy or imitate others. That relates very much to autistic masking, and believe that there are correct answers to questions. Some autistic people will stim, and that's an important word. Stim, the term stimming derives from self-stimulation and may be described in medical terms as restrictive or repetitive behaviors. Some autistic people stim to help manage feelings of anxiety or express emotions such as happiness or excitement. Examples of stimming include hand flapping, twirling, rocking. My stimming, I guess, activity, if you like, is that I repeatedly can't keep my legs still when I'm in a nervous situation. So stimming it's important to allow autistics to stim as not feeling um, not feeling allowed to stim will be a form of masking. So it's an important thing to let people do as they want to do. An autistic person may struggle with executive function to various degrees. Executive functions refer to a set of skills including working memory, the ability to plan, task initiation, staying organized, and self-control. Different autistic people may have varying abilities to read their body's internal cues, such as when they are hungry, thirsty, or ill. These senses may be referred to as interoception or interoceptive senses. Next slide, please. Many autistic people need routines and have a strong preference for sameness and certainty. Some autistic people may have difficulties with posture and so can't sit still, handle long sessions. That's me to a lot of the extent. Over or under sensitivity to light, sound, taste, smell, or touch. Background noise can therefore be debilitating. Sensory overload is quite common. Many autistic people have highly focused interests, hobbies, and specialisms. I can tell you, for example, with regard to the Titanic, who was in what lifeboat which left at a particular time. I don't know why I can do it, but I can. I've always been fascinated by Titanic, so just shows, doesn't it? Many people have autistic extreme anxiety, particularly about new situations and social events. Describing and or regulating emotions can also be difficult for autistic people. Autistic people can either have meltdowns and or shutdowns. The former is an externalized response to overload, which can be quite dramatic in terms of how people present. The latter is very much internalized. People literally shut down all their bodily activities and become very robotic, very, very still, and not able to communicate. Lots of autistic people have burnout as well. Living as an autistic person can be intensely exhausting, having to cope with things such as sensory overload, autistic masking, executive dysfunctioning, and so on and so forth. Executive dysfunctioning, by the way, refers to difficulties with the cognitive processes that help with planning, organization, and self-regulation. Next slide, please. And I think it's good to remember all of these things. I won't go through each one in turn, but particularly I want to focus on the issue of nothing about us without us. That's important for people, for involving people with autism. So I'm coming to the end of my slides in a minute, and we'll hand over to my colleagues. But so next slide, please, Michelle. Here are some examples of accessibility measures for autistic people. Consider, for example, the timing of events, workshops, focus groups, whatever you're doing, with a consideration of the impact of medication for autistic attendees. Sharing agendas and arrangements and helping people visualize meeting spaces well in advance to prepare for workshops, meetings, focus groups, or whatever else you're doing. This may mean practice runs, both face-to-face if possible and online. So encouraging people maybe to come and visit the venue beforehand and be there to meet them, to go over the layout and so on and so forth. Some autistic people may wish to arrive considerably early for an event to avoid busy arrival times. This also relates to the fact that many neurodivergent people find public transport inaccessible for numerous reasons. Sensory overload, the uncertainty, unpredictability, anxiety of getting somewhere might mean that people actually don't go through the process of using public transport. Autistic people may wish to sit in a particular position at an event, focus group, etc. For me, that means sitting towards the edge, towards the side, towards the back, and looking out. So I have a way of escape, I guess. Try to keep to time as much as possible and do what you say you are going to do. Meet the expectations that are in the agenda and so forth that you've sent out before. Ensure that all communication is clear and concise and that autistic people have the opportunity to ask questions and to challenge. And icebreaker activities and moving people around a room may be particularly challenging for autistic people. Next slide, please. Consider providing noise cancelling earplugs. Again, for obvious reasons, sensory overload. Have a plan for networking activities for breakout rooms and breaks. Allow autistic people more time to process information. Don't hurry them to respond. Put things in writing as well as verbalizing them. And this can be highly personal. Some autistic people may need a particular colored paper, for example, or type or size of font, for instance. Arrange for a quiet space at your event. Ensure that autistic people know they can use it at any time. Relaxing music may also help. And schedule regular breaks and do activities in shorter chunks. And lastly, encourage people who wish to use communication devices, cards, and or the sunflower lanyard for hidden disabilities. I have one which I'm putting up on the screen now, if you can see that. It has a lanyard full of sunflowers, and it indicates people with hidden disabilities. They're quite useful. maybe have some available for people to use at an event. This helps people to self-identify without the need to verbalize. Next slide, please. And I'll now hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Jules. That was a really comprehensive overview, but also highlighting some of the key points and examples. So thank you very much. Before I move to Jess, I'm just checking because there was a comment on the chat about slides being frozen. So I'm just checking if people can see the slides and they are moving, or it might be just individual issues. So they are moving on my end.
I can see the slides, but somebody's drawn on them, so there's like lines across the front.
That's true.
Yeah, okay.
But they're just only switched in this last slide, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you.
The talk was really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. So we will not be taking any question at this point, but please do reserve your question and also start putting them in the chat, and we will have a dedicated session for this. So the next presentation is from Jess, and Jess is going to reflect on her lived experience of being researchers and how to make research accessible to all. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jez. I'm a postdoc at the University of Leicester, and I work in the Department of Cardiovascular Sciences and Analytical Chemistry. And I just want to give you my experience from childhood, a short talk on childhood all the way up until postdoc, and what I've experienced and the positive sides of the university and how they can help. Next slide, please. So how it started. So as a child, I was told that I was just hyperactive. And I think a lot of people are told this. You know, I couldn't keep still, bouncing off the walls. It didn't matter how many times the people, parents or family or even teachers would tell me off. I just couldn't help myself. I just felt like I was bursting with energy all the time. So I did feel like there was something wrong with me and I didn't belong in certain situations. So I did go to 5 different secondary schools. So I was in the care system. And I think a lot of this hyperactive disorder, people would assume because of my unfortunate past history, moving in care and moving into hospitals at the age of 14. So they say it's just me masking, like Jules beautifully said. But it wasn't until Demont University that the lecturers there took me aside and said, no, we need to get you not looked at, but we need to sit down and have a proper discussion. They then looked at my different learning styles, techniques. I couldn't sit in a lecture hall with the 250 students and try to concentrate. I would wander off and think what I'm going to have for dinner, or, you know, I need to go home, or I just completely forget. So I'd have to use different coloured pens to write down, and still I found it difficult. Or if I was learning chemistry or biochemistry, the teacher would get me to do jigsaw puzzles because it's how my brain works. I'm a visual learner. I like to see things and discuss things. So then in 2019, I attended group therapy because all through my life, the doctors or the school, lots of people would say, it's just all in your head, you're just depressed, you have anxiety, there's nothing wrong with you, sort of thing. You just go and, you know, you need to deal with your past. But with this group therapy, it was a psychiatrist and a psychologist, 2 doctors normally. So it wasn't just a counsellor. Counsellors are brilliant as well, but they were qualified to diagnose. And they said, well, no, we think you definitely, with the 12 sessions we've had with you, think you have ADHD. And as a woman, you've been masking it, you know, especially trying to go through life. So it was a kind of relief for me to think, well, actually, I am normal, you know, human, and I do belong here. It's just that my brain works differently. In 2023, I was also unfortunately diagnosed with a brain injury, a traumatic brain injury. So I have lesions on my brain. So the consultant there keeps referring to me as high functioning ADHD. Again, there's a lot of debate whether it's from trauma, my life history, or I was born that way. I personally now know, and I believe this is who I am. I've always been this way. It's just unfortunately, I also now have a brain trauma. Next slide, please. So making research accessible to all. What I've gone through and what I've learned is that we just making small adaptations for one person, say getting a ramp for someone who's in a wheelchair, makes a place accessible to absolutely everyone. You know, so and I think the university is doing a great job with that, and especially with me, during my PhD, I found it so difficult to go to lectures, seminars, and they wanted to help me by separating me at a point, and then kind of like training me separately. But then I felt like an outcast. But we'll talk about that again on another slide. So having an empathetic research culture. So I work with iReach, which is looking at the empathy and the research culture within the university. And my professor, I've always spoken positive of him because he is somebody who I personally can approach, and he can sit me down and ask, what can I do for you? How can I make your life better? And having someone like that has made me feel safe, and safe to feel like I can fail, make mistakes. If I say something that I'm not supposed to say at the right time, which does happen, my mouth can get carried away with me sometimes, but I feel safe to do that. And so he doesn't make me feel like a burden or an outcast. And he even said to me yesterday, which I will say, he goes, I do not want you to change. I love who you are. Stay like that. So that was brilliant. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now the access to work has got involved, as well as the disability team at the University of Leicester. And they have put some work adaptations for me because I'm no longer a PhD. It did take me a year longer to graduate, but I managed to do it. And so now as a postdoc, trying to keep me in work, the access to work for the government have helped me. So they have come in, they did an assessment, and they have helped me with, as Jules says, I need earplugs, so noise cancelling headphones when I'm in the labs because the machines are extremely loud, and I've got tinnitus, so my ears start ringing, and then I get headaches. So they're helping with things like that. Temperature dysregulation I have, so my temperature can change from one room to the next pretty quickly. So they even help me with things like that, with like a cardigan or a fan at my desk. Also, disability awareness training for the colleagues. So for my professor, for the postdocs, for the PhDs, we'll have training to say, actually, how can we make this accessible to all? And what's happened is now I have a tablet where I can record meetings and it will transcribe it and bullet point it for me. And because my professor has sat down with everyone in our group, we have a large group, everyone is so happy to help me and say, no, I'll either train you separately, or we can record it, we can stop it, we can repeat it, it doesn't matter. And that makes me feel extremely safe and valued. So they also support our flexible working arrangements. Although I love being in a routine, and I do get a bit down when my routine is broken, my supervisor is there to say, it's okay, you make your own time, as long as the work's done, you can come in the mornings, come in the afternoons, work in the evenings, whenever it fits around you. And I think having that support has made me fly through my first year of postdoc and made me want to engage more within my research. Next slide, please. And so inclusive research culture, this equates to better research outputs. Because I feel protected now where I am, I feel heard, I feel listened to, I feel safe, it makes me want to impress my supervisors even more, to show them that, yes, I have a brain injury, I have ADHD, and a lot of comorbidities that go along with other things, but it makes me feel safe. And now I'm writing papers, I can do what other researchers are doing. I can go into the lab, I can find biomarkers for cardiovascular diseases, and I feel valued. And my supervisor tells me every day, you're doing good. Not just because he needs to say it, but he says to me, you are doing good. So the outputs for him are really good. So I think that having the training for everybody to make research accessible makes the environment better for all of us, and hopefully within my career. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you so much for sharing your personal journey and sharing some personal story, highlighting, how difficult, but also where you are now. So thank you for doing this. So our next presentation will be from Charlotte and Sarah, and they're going to give you an example of a study they conducted and how they involve neurodivergent individuals. Over to you, Charlotte and Sarah.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks very much for inviting us to speak today. I'm Dr. Charlotte Hall and my colleague Sarah Cooper. We're from the University of Nottingham, and we're going to talk to you today about our experiences of involving neurodivergent individuals as research participants in our study, drawing mainly from a research project called EXPAND. Next slide, please. Very briefly, EXPAND was a research project looking at what barriers ethnic minority groups face when accessing care and health services for neurodevelopmental disorders for their children. Next slide. We really just want to acknowledge two key team members as well, and the adaptations that you're going to hear about today were very much co-created with these team members. That's Dr. Shireen Patel and Dr. Camilla Babbage. Next slide. And before we start, we just want to acknowledge three really key points. Number one, there may be a wrong way of involving neurodivergent people, but there's rarely one right way. So it might be that we say something that you feel wouldn't fit with your experiences, or it might be that we don't mention something that's really important. And that's why it's really key that we have conversations and events such as today, so we continue to learn from each other. Neurodiversity, as we heard from Julian, covers a wide range of different disorders: ADHD, autism, learning disability. And there's a huge variation between these disorders, but also within the disorders. There's this common saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So often when we're talking about adaptations, they may not work across the board. It's important to keep adapting. And finally, again, as it's been touched on, terminology can be really controversial. Some people prefer the word diversity, disability, disorder, condition. We tend to use the medical terminology, but I want to acknowledge today that I realise that might not be everybody's preference. Next slide. Within EXPAND, we involve neurodivergent people in three key ways. We had our patient and public involvement group of neurodiverse individuals. We also conducted interviews of parents who had neurodivergent children, as well as adults that themselves had neurodivergent disorders. And finally, we conducted interviews with neurodivergent children, and we're going to talk briefly about these experiences. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah to talk about the adults. If we could move to the next slide, please.
Hi there, thank you, Charlotte. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different adult groups that we involved in EXPAND. So that's with our PPIE and our lived experience members, but also our parents of children with neurodivergency and them themselves who had neurodivergent conditions as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think the overarching kind of concept that we went into this process with was the idea of flexibility. And I think, you know, other speakers have kind of really touched on this as well. But this was something that we really kind of embraced and acknowledged that it was going to be a fundamental part of us being able to conduct this research in an inclusive manner. So really, we wanted to make sure that everybody that was involved understood that their involvement was voluntary. And we did have quite a few individuals that struggled a little bit with their time management. So we wanted to kind of reassure off the bat, you know, if you miss a meeting, if you know that time blindness, my son suffers quite significantly with time blindness, you know, that's okay. We still want them to be involved. They're still valued, move things around. So in that regard, flexibility. We looked at meetings and interviews, making sure that when they were online, we looked at being flexible around those times, school times, pickup times, accommodating parents. And Charlotte will talk a little bit more about that later on as well in terms of timings. So we had to make sure that we were prepared to rearrange, change, postpone, being flexible to make sure that actually it's not one shot and you're done if you don't make it. It's about building in that flexibility to your kind of research protocol and practices. And then that kind of feeds into a lot of the things with the groups, the focus groups and interviews. We gave people the option of choosing to be part of a focus group, but also there was the option of having paired interviews or one-to-one interviews. And again, that flexibility, depending on people's different needs, was really important to kind of accommodate that. Same with camera on or camera off. And again, other people have mentioned some of the issues that people might have with having their cameras on. We, again, were very flexible in terms of, you know, we were absolutely fine whether they had their cameras on, cameras off, microphones on, microphones off during PPI meetings. Those contributions, we just found ways that actually people still want to be able to contribute. We need to make sure that we're providing an environment to allow that. Next slide, please. So specifically thinking about our PPI group, obviously, as Charlotte mentioned, those included individuals with lived experience, but also parents that were parents to children with neurodiversity. So this was really key for us before we actually worked with the group formally. We actually wanted to work with them to arrange ways of working. And this was making sure that we were open and honest at the start, kind of facilitating those discussions about what will work for the group, what will make sure that everybody can take part, contribute, and that everybody is in agreement with that, so there are no surprises later on. So again, I mentioned kind of flexibility. So for a lot of times we talk about don't shout out in meetings, put your hand up function, things like that. But for some people that maybe have verbal tics, that's not possible. So it's about having that open conversation about, okay, if that happens, that's fine. We're all aware of it. What do you want us to do to kind of mitigate that? Do you want your microphone off, use chat, things like that? Respecting people's difference. And again, this is about being open and honest and asking people's opinions and preferences. Not everybody has the same experience, and that's fine. We respect everybody's lived experience, everyone's perspective, but it's about being honest. We do not correct people's stutters or tics in meetings, and it's just making sure that everybody's aware of that, because one person's neurodivergence is not the same as another's. But again, camera on, camera off, things like that. So that's just specifically for our PPI groups, and it's making sure we agree those things before we get cracking with the research project. Next slide, please. So communication was really important. And again, some people have touched on these issues. We made sure that actually we wanted to accommodate people's time management, people's organization, people's routines, and building in that kind of expectation of what's going to happen, what's this going to look like, sending agendas out before the meetings, sharing slides before the meetings, making sure things aren't too fussy, it's very clear and it's plain, so people have the time to digest the information before going into those meetings. And also I mentioned about time blindness. We send out text, but again, we ask, do you want a text? Do you want WhatsApp? Do you want email? Whatever they prefer. Next slide, please. So sharing things as well. We really try to accommodate lots of visual representations of the research project. So this was something that we shared with our PPI group, and it was a live working document that they all had access to. It was a visual timetable to show them exactly where meetings were, what the nature of the meetings, different aspects of the research project, where they could be involved. And they were also able to share their feedback and ideas, and also ability to commit to different things, and at different times, really, whenever was appropriate for them. Next slide, please. And again, this really helped with using this technology. I had one PPI member who liked to give their feedback at around 3 o'clock in the morning, because that was when he was awake and he couldn't sleep. So he'd post up things, at random times in the morning. But this online platform allowed him to make the contributions when it was comfortable for him. One thing I would say, in my experience, have these in mind before you start your research project. Because when people are asking for accommodations, it's really, really, really nice to actually be able to say straight away, we've got a potential solution for this. We've thought about that. We've thought about how we can include different peoples and different diversity. Here is the solution. Does that work? So I would strongly recommend to think about that and consider it and come with answers to those potential issues. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to hand back to Dr. Hall to talk a little bit about our young people work.
Thanks, Sarah. So much of what Sarah's covered really does also cover for young people, but I just want to touch on maybe some specifics that we should think about. Next slide, please. And I'm going to use the example as if we have a young person with neurodivergency and we want to conduct an interview or an appointment with them. And this appointment might be face-to-face or it might be online. It's really important that you speak with the parent first to try and understand a little bit more about the young person before you meet them. Do they want a family member present during that appointment? And that really depends on the age of the child. Obviously, if they're younger, a family member should be present, but often older children don't want a family member. Or maybe there's a key family member they really get on with and it's best to be there to support them. Do they need a comforter? This might be a toy or a blanket or even a pet, particularly if this is being done remotely. We can accommodate that, and we often find our young people have close bonds with their pets. Do they require a social script? This is typically important for people with autism. And what we mean by social script is almost like a visual flow of what's going to happen. If we envisage a face-to-face meeting, this might be photos of what the front door looks like, what the corridor is, where the room they're going to sit, who they're going to meet, and in an order of which that's going to happen, so they can start to familiarize themselves with what's going to occur. Is there a best time to conduct this appointment? Again, Julian's touched on this. When, for example, the medication might be optimized in the day. This is often important for young people with ADHD. And do they have terminology preferences? How do they prefer their condition to be referred to? Do they have any key hobbies or interests that you could know about in advance to be able to form some icebreakers and build a relationship? And also, as a researcher, it's important to know what your must-haves are. What do you really need to get from this appointment so you don't have to rebook it again, versus what are your nice to have? What are the things that you can let slip if this appointment's going a little bit off track? Next slide, please. And during an appointment, it's important to think about how the young person might present. So they might not always answer your questions. They might feel shy or awkward or disengaged. They might also prefer to speak via mum or their key carer and not to you directly. It's important to allow these things to happen, to not take this personally, and to realise that this might be something that is just important for this young person to be able to engage with you via these different distractions. They might talk about something completely different to the question that you've asked, and it's important to allow that flexibility for that to happen before trying to re-get them back on topic. They might wander off, either within the room or completely outside the room. They might fidget or be distractible. And again, it's just important to allow the space and time for these events to happen, to not get flustered and to try bring on track when it's possible. But in the case of meltdowns or outbursts, this might not always be possible. And it's important in these instances to understand from the parent or a key healthcare worker what's right for that child. Can they come back down from this meltdown, or does this appointment need to be rescheduled at a later point? We've talked about eye contact, and that might be very difficult for young people. It's again something that you should just acknowledge and not try and force an eye contact or make any comments about. And always, I'm sure one thing that's come across of all of our slides is be prepared to go off script. Have a script, but be prepared to deviate from it. Next slide. I just want to finalize what we've been talking about, just wrapping up on some of these key skills. So I think something that's come across is this need for clear communication, which can be used to support with visual supports, simplified language, and being able to adapt your language where needed. It's important to take time to create a safe environment to help the person feel comfortable and engaged with what you're going to do. As a researcher, you should have awareness of neurodiversity to understand the different profiles, how they overlap and how they manifest. It's important to be sensitive to ethics, to minimise harm and stress on that participant, to know when that participant's becoming overwhelmed and when they should pause and when you should stop doing your research activities. And that very much links into flexibility and methodology. We need to often tailor our approaches to the individual to suit their sensory or cognitive or emotional needs. And it's important to continuously evaluate this. Do you need to stick with what you're doing, switch, or stop entirely? When we're thinking about collaboration, it's important to also learn from the people that know that person the best. So whether that's key educators, a parent or a caregiver or a healthcare worker, to understand how best we can make this appointment work for that individual. And it's also important to think about cultural competency. We need to use neurodiversity affirming language, and what that is might differ between individuals, but it should be respectful and person-centered. And also it's important to have awareness of how things such as ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic background might intersect with neurodivergency. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to end by saying, I think as a researcher, of which many researchers also have neurodivergent conditions themselves, but obviously not everybody. But regardless of that, it's normal that you might feel frustrated as a researcher if you didn't get the data you wanted, or disappointed in your skills, and to acknowledge that also we're all human and that we're continuing to learn as we go along. And it's important to take those learning points from everything that we do. And we'd love to continue this conversation with you further. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Charlotte and Sarah. That was a really interesting presentation. I know we slightly overrun our presentation section, but I think you have provided lots of important tools and top tips and practical example how you can make your research more inclusive while involving individual with neurodiversity. So thank you very much. So we've got about 8 minutes left, and that's the time when we're inviting the audience to participate in a discussion. So if you have a question for individual speakers, or you want to share your reflection, please do. You can communicate and engage with us on the chat. You can raise your hands and ask the question directly. So I can't see any questions in the chat, and I just wonder if people have any question directed to Jules, Sarah, Charlotte, and Jess. So I think people to get a chance maybe to think about it. I mean, there's been a lot of really useful, informative conversation for the last 45 minutes. So I hope that also